I woke just as the first sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of our Richmond townhouse, the familiar hum of the city beginning to stir outside. At 57, I had long since grown accustomed to the rhythm of my days, but mornings still held a quiet comfort, the soft smell of coffee brewing, the distant chatter of neighbors beginning their routines, and the calm knowledge that my son, Nathan, was safe upstairs. He had returned home recently after years away at college and work, and though he was an adult now, the habit of caring for him lingered as naturally as breathing. The kitchen was warm and inviting, the worn oak table set neatly for breakfast. I poured 2 cups of coffee, the steam curling in lazy spirals, and glanced toward Nathan's room. His Bible, a recent gift from a colleague, lay closed on the bedside table. I noticed it more than once had been slightly shifted, a small, almost imperceptible hint that he handled it with a care I didn't fully understand. I shrugged it off. He had always been private, even as a child, and I had learned to respect that space. I moved through my morning routine with practiced efficiency, checking the mailbox, watering the small herb garden outside, and preparing breakfast. The city's energy drifted up the street. Neighbors walking dogs, the occasional honk of a car. Everything appeared ordinary, peaceful, almost too ordinary, but I had learned over the years to observe the details, the quiet patterns, the small shifts in behavior that might otherwise go unnoticed. As I set Nathan's plate on the table, he appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He smiled, distracted by his phone, and I felt the faint tug of curiosity about the Bible on his nightstand. Something about it seemed different, almost deliberate, but I pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the ordinary rhythm of the morning, unaware that the quiet of today would soon be shattered by something I could never have anticipated. After breakfast, I moved quietly through the house, tidying the small living room and arranging the cushions just so. Nathan had gone back upstairs to answer an urgent email from work, and the quiet was almost suffocating. I had intended only to check the calendar in his Bible. He often marked important dates there, but when I lifted it from the nightstand, I noticed something unusual. The leather cover was slightly creased in a place it shouldn't have been, and a small folded piece of paper peeked from between the pages. My curiosity overrode caution, and I carefully opened it. The words were scrawled in a hurried hand, jagged and precise. If she discovers the truth, kill her. My heart stopped. I dropped the note back onto the pages and sat heavily in the chair beside his bed. The words repeated themselves in my mind, each syllable heavier than the last. Who had written this? What truth could be so dangerous? And who was she for a moment? I could only stare at the page, my pulse thundering in my ears. It didn't make sense. My son's Bible, a place of reflection and faith, now held a threat that could not be ignored. I fought to steady myself, taking shallow breaths as I tried to reconcile the familiar calm of my home with the sudden, suffocating fear that had taken hold. I thought of Nathan, unsuspecting, engrossed in his work upstairs. Could this be aimed at him or at me? My mind raced through every interaction, every person he had spent time with recently, trying to identify a potential source of danger. The possibilities felt endless, each more unsettling than the last. I reached for the Bible again, this time with trembling hands, unfolding the note fully to examine the handwriting. It was deliberate, controlled, someone who wanted to be sure the threat was taken seriously. My stomach knotted as I realized that whoever wrote this had intended for the message to be found. It was not random, not accidental. This was a warning, aimed to terrify and manipulate, and I had no clue how far it extended. The rest of the morning passed in a haze. I found myself glancing repeatedly at the Bible, imagining every scenario, every danger that might lurk unseen. My usual composure, honed over decades of experience raising a family and managing a household, felt fragile. I forced myself to move on with chores, preparing lunch mechanically. But my thoughts refused to settle. Every sound upstairs, every muted footstep, made me jump. I realized, with a sinking certainty, that my life and Nathan's might be far less secure than I had ever imagined. By mid-afternoon, I had made a quiet decision. I would not confront Nathan directly. I would not act impulsively. Instead, I would begin observing, questioning, and gathering information cautiously. The note had changed everything, and I understood instinctively that the first step in survival was clarity. I returned the note carefully to the Bible, closed it, and placed it back on the nightstand, knowing that what I had discovered was only the beginning of a story I could never have anticipated. This realization marked the first step toward uncovering the truth, and it would lead me directly into a web of secrets I had yet to imagine. The day after discovering the note, I moved through the house with an acute awareness I hadn't experienced in years. Every sound, every shift in light became a potential clue. Nathan seemed entirely ordinary on the surface. He worked quietly at his desk, answered emails, and occasionally laughed softly at something on his phone. But small details began to prick at my instincts. I noticed how he kept the Bible close, almost as if it were a talisman, and how he sometimes glanced over his shoulder when he answered calls. The phone conversations were short, abrupt, and hushed, words clipped and careful. I could not hear them clearly, and I did not try. But I cataloged each pause, each hesitation, storing them in my mind. It was familiar work. I had spent decades reading the smallest signs, learning that human behavior often reveals more than words alone. There were also small, curious deliveries packages arriving for Nathan that he accepted quickly, closing the door behind him and concealing the contents from sight. He retrieved letters and documents from drawers I never thought to check, placing them back as though nothing had happened. My pulse quickened each time, but I maintained my composure outwardly. I had learned long ago that fear is best kept hidden when reasoning is required. Over several days, I began to notice patterns. Meetings and phone calls often occurred at the same time, suggesting deliberate scheduling. Notes and receipts were tucked in unusual places, some hidden beneath papers on his desk or slid inside the covers of books he rarely opened. My mind, trained from years of running a household and managing life's unexpected complications, began to form questions and tentative conclusions. There were connections here, but what they meant was still unclear. I also observed subtle signs of tension in Nathan himself, a quickened heartbeat when he thought no one was watching, a brief frown over messages that seemed harmless at first glance. It told me he carried a burden, something hidden from everyone. I realized I would have to gather information quietly, piece by piece, and wait for a clearer picture before acting. By the end of the week, I had enough observations to begin mapping possibilities. Each clue was small but deliberate, like pieces of a puzzle scattered across our lives. I resolved to continue my watch, careful not to alert Nathan or anyone else, knowing that patience and caution would be essential. The note had opened a door I could not close, and what I discovered next would force me to confront realities I had not imagined. This preparation would lead directly into the investigation that could reveal the truth behind the terrifying message. I began combing through the small clues I had gathered, piecing them together like a puzzle. Receipts tucked into Nathan's desk, letters carefully folded in envelopes he left carelessly on his bookshelf, and notes scrawled in margins of documents all pointed to something more than ordinary correspondence. Each item hinted at meetings, schedules, and transactions I had not been aware of, all linked in some intricate web that involved his friend from work, a man named Philip. Philip's presence had always seemed benign. He accompanied Nathan to social events and sometimes dropped by the apartment under the guise of casual visits. But now the pattern of deliveries and hidden papers suggested coordination. Some receipts were for equipment Nathan supposedly needed for work, yet the timing and locations were suspicious. Several led to areas of Richmond I knew he had no legitimate business in. My heart raced with the realization that these were not coincidences. I made a mental map of the interactions, connecting dates, addresses, and names. Each connection tightened the knot of concern in my chest. The note in the Bible, which had seemed abstract and terrifying before, now felt like a warning I could not ignore. My son's friend, once a casual acquaintance, was entangled in a scheme that threatened not only him, but our entire household. Even with this evidence, I had to maintain calm. Nathan moved through his routines unaware of the alarm I felt, and I could not act hastily. Small-town Richmond was tight-knit. Any suspicion raised prematurely could backfire, alerting the wrong person. My motherly instinct told me to watch, wait, and verify before confronting anyone. As I carefully organized the clues, mapping connections and noting inconsistencies, the weight of potential danger pressed on me. I understood that what I discovered next would require strategy, patience, and a courage I had not needed in decades, setting the stage for the plan I would soon have to execute. I spent the evening reviewing the notes and receipts I had gathered, carefully arranging them by date and location. Each piece formed part of a puzzle that, when pieced together, hinted at a larger, more dangerous scheme than I had initially imagined. My mind raced, not with panic, but with strategy. At 57, I had learned that haste could ruin even the clearest plan. Every move had to be deliberate, precise, and hidden. The first step was securing finances. Nathan had no idea I had been saving from my small freelance projects over the years, and now those savings became vital. I opened a separate bank account in another part of Richmond under my own name, ensuring it could not be traced. It was a modest sum, enough to act if the situation worsened, but it gave me the comfort of a contingency plan. Next, I documented everything. Letters, receipts, and schedules were photographed and cataloged, forming a silent record of events I could not yet confront directly. I worked late into the night, moving quietly so as not to disturb Nathan. Each photo and note was a potential safeguard, a way to protect both him and myself should the threat escalate. I also reached out discreetly to Julia, my oldest friend and confidant. I explained that I had concerns that required attention, carefully omitting specifics that could tip anyone off. Julia agreed to be vigilant, to watch for anything unusual while keeping her presence unobtrusive. A trusted ally nearby meant I was not alone in observing the situation, and the weight of responsibility became slightly lighter. Throughout the process, I moved with the patience and precision life experience had taught me. Every glance, every movement was measured. I could not afford suspicion or error. My thoughts returned constantly to the note I had found. If she discovers the truth, kill her. The words had not lost their power, but now they fueled a calculated determination rather than fear. By the end of the week, the plan was taking shape. I would continue observing, collecting evidence, and preparing contingencies. Each step brought the danger into sharper focus, but also clarified the path forward. I understood that the next actions I took would define our safety, and the careful strategy I had developed would be tested sooner than I anticipated, leading directly into the confrontation that was inevitable. The week of careful observation and documentation had led me to a clearer picture, one I had pieced together slowly, deliberately. As I moved quietly through our Richmond neighborhood, Nathan's friend, Philip, who had seemed harmless and courteous, was at the center of a plan that threatened not only him, but the people I cared for most. Every detail, receipts, notes, unusual trips converged into a single chilling possibility. The note in the Bible was no longer abstract. It was a warning about a real, imminent danger. I had to act, but I knew any misstep could alert Philip and escalate the threat. My decades of experience taught me the value of timing and subtlety. I carefully arranged the evidence I had collected, receipts showing irregular purchases, letters hinting at clandestine meetings, and a schedule mapping his movements. Each piece was cataloged, cross-referenced, and photographed. With this information, I contacted Inspector Reynolds, a trusted official I had known through neighborhood interactions, explaining that I had reason to believe a scheme was underway that could endanger someone's life. The inspector listened intently, skeptical at first, but the evidence left no room for doubt. Plans were set in motion without Philip's knowledge. Surveillance, routine checks, and subtle monitoring were arranged, timed to coincide with the moments I knew he would attempt action. All the while, I maintained my outward composure at home, speaking casually with Nathan, laughing at his remarks, and attending to the ordinary demands of daily life. My careful calm masked the storm of tension inside, every heartbeat reminding me of the stakes. When the day arrived, the authorities moved quietly but efficiently. Philip was intercepted during one of his planned excursions. The evidence presented in a controlled manner that ensured his capture without alerting others who might be involved. The sense of relief was immediate, but tempered by the gravity of what could have occurred. Nathan remained unaware, safely engrossed in his own routine, while I realized the full weight of what we had narrowly avoided. The confrontation had been successful because of patience, observation, and the careful orchestration of every detail. My experience, calm reasoning, and ability to anticipate behavior had made the difference. The immediate danger was neutralized, but the emotional toll lingered. I understood that our lives had been forever altered, and that the next steps would involve recovery, explanation, and the careful rebuilding of trust. This outcome set the stage for the resolution and the new sense of safety that we would cautiously embrace in the following days. The day following Philip's arrest, a quiet settled over the house. Though it was not the same quiet I had known before, the immediate danger was gone, yet the weight of what could have happened lingered, pressing gently against every thought. I moved deliberately, checking locks, arranging the kitchen, and making sure Nathan's routines remained uninterrupted. Relief mixed with vigilance, a reminder that the close call had changed us. I chose my words carefully when speaking with Nathan. He listened intently as I explained the events, aware that something serious had occurred, but shielded from the most alarming details. I emphasized what he needed to understand: that we were safe now, that the threat had been neutralized, and that careful observation and patience had prevented disaster. His eyes reflected curiosity and a hint of apprehension, and I could sense a growing maturity as he began to grasp the implications. Julia, my steadfast friend, arrived later in the afternoon. She had supported me from the start, keeping watch discreetly and helping me assess what needed attention. I shared the sequence of events, reviewing the evidence and the steps we had taken to protect ourselves. Her calm presence reinforced the lessons I had learned in the past week. Patience, strategy, and measured action were powerful tools against uncertainty. As the evening settled, I reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. The note I had discovered in Nathan's Bible had sparked a chain of events that tested my caution, intelligence, and resolve. The fear that once gripped me had been replaced by confidence in my ability to act decisively, to protect my family, and to navigate threats I had once thought beyond my control. Nathan returned to his work. Julia departed with reassurance, and I sat for a moment alone, letting the reality of our safety sink in. The immediate danger had passed, but the lessons remained. The next phase would be about rebuilding routines, reinforcing vigilance, and embracing a sense of cautious hope, leading naturally into a new chapter of life and a beginning that felt both tentative and full of possibility. Nathan had returned to work with a steadier confidence, and I allowed him space to settle into his own rhythms while remaining alert to anything unusual. Our household had regained its balance, but the trust we once took for granted had been tempered by experience. I found myself observing details that had once seemed inconsequential: the small movements of neighbors, the timing of deliveries, the consistency of schedules, and using that awareness to maintain a secure environment. In these quiet moments, I reflected on how much I had grown over the past weeks. The fear that once immobilized me had transformed into a measured courage, a quiet strength that allowed me to act decisively without losing control. I had learned the power of patience, of observing before acting, and of preparing contingencies even when the threat was invisible. This vigilance had preserved our safety and reshaped my understanding of independence. I no longer relied solely on circumstance or on the assumption of protection from others. I had become the guardian of our home and our future. The process of rebuilding went beyond physical routines. I began dedicating time to projects I had put aside, small personal goals that reinforced my sense of agency. Each stitch I sewed, each task I completed, carried with it the affirmation that our lives were ours to shape, that preparedness and courage could transform even the darkest warning into an opportunity for strength. As evenings settled and Nathan prepared for bed, I allowed myself a rare moment of quiet reflection. The experience had left its mark, but it had also revealed the resilience within me, the ability to protect, adapt, and endure. I recognized that what had started as fear had grown into empowerment. The new rhythm of our days was no longer just about survival. It was about embracing the lessons we had learned and moving forward with intention and confidence, ready to face whatever came next.